All right, so we're diving into Ontario politics today.
Yep.
Specifically, we're trying to understand what's been happening under Doug Ford's leadership,
Right.
and we've got a ton of information to go through.
Yeah, a lot of
We've
stuff.
got articles, we've got blog posts.
Data analysis, even some first-hand accounts.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So we're really going to get a big picture of this.
It's a lot to sort through, but that's our mission here, right?
Exactly.
To cut through all the noise and figure out what are the biggest issues facing Ontario right now.
That's the goal.
Okay, so one thing that really stuck out to me was this term chair medicine. It keeps popping up, especially in those articles from local.
Oh, yeah.
They're talking about patients in Ontario emergency rooms literally receiving treatments in chairs
Yeah.
because there aren't enough beds.
Right. It's a pretty stark illustration of this whole hallway healthcare crisis.
Right.
You know, the one Ford promised he would solve?
Yeah, he made a big deal about that.
He did, but sadly, it seems like things have actually gotten worse.
Is that right?
Yeah. The local even had this story about a nurse
Okay.
who was a patient herself, spending 11 hours in an ER chair
Oh, wow.
with kidney stone pain.
Oh, gosh, that's awful.
And they did everything,
Yeah.
medication, blood work.
All the chair.
Oh, well, she was just sitting in that chair.
That's just wild to me.
It is.
I mean, and it really makes you wonder about the long-term consequences
Absolutely.
of this kind of strain on the system.
Yeah.
Like, what happens when people can't even get a bed in an emergency room?
Well, it points to a much bigger issue.
Right.
This underfunding of home care,
Yeah.
long-term care, supportive housing.
Mhm.
It's forcing more and more people into hospitals.
I see.
And that's what leads to this overcrowding.
Yeah, so it's like trying to fit, I don't know, like
It's-
way too many people on an airplane
Yeah,
or something
yes,
like that,
yeah.
where it's just, and there's just physically not enough space.
right, exactly.
And it's not just the physical space.
Oh, no, it's not.
Our sources also talk about a serious staffing crisis
Yeah,
in healthcare.
huge problem. And I think Bill 124 is a big part of that.
Okay, remind me what that is again?
So that's the one that capped wages for public sector workers,
Oh, right.
including nurses and other healthcare professionals.
Okay.
And critics say that's led to, low morale, trouble keeping experienced staff,
Yeah.
which just makes the staffing shortage even worse.
Right, so it's like this policy decision
Exactly.
that had all these unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for sure.
Yeah, very complex issue.
All right, well, speaking of complex issues,
Sure.
let's move on to education.
Okay.
Because our sources, especially the local, again,
Yeah.
raised some serious concerns about the state of schools in Ontario,
Yeah.
especially in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently, the Toronto District School Board,
Right.
which is the biggest one in the province, right,
Biggest one.
got $0
Wow.
for new schools in the latest round of funding.
That's pretty surprising.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how they decide who gets the money.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, how fair is that process?
Well, the local kind of dug into that a bit.
Did they?
And it sounds like it's not very clear-cut.
Okay.
So, of course, that's led to accusations of political bias,
Oh, I see.
with some saying that school boards in PC-held ridings
Right.
are getting preferential treatment.
Okay, yeah.
And meanwhile, the consequences for students are very real.
Absolutely.
The article highlighted Northern Secondary School.
I think I read about that.
It dates back to 1930.
Wow.
They've got broken boilers, leaky roofs, and get this, a facility condition index of 96.6%.
That's almost 100.
I know, right?
Like, what does that even mean?
Well, it basically means they need to completely replace the school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like, it's basically falling apart.
That's bad.
Yeah, and it's not just an isolated case.
Right.
A lot of schools in Ontario are facing similar problems.
I see.
Crumbling infrastructure, overcrowded classrooms, teacher shortages.
And that's all connected to Bill 124 as well, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly.
It all kind of ties together.
It's a mess.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
So we've got healthcare struggling, education underfunded.
Uh-huh.
What about the overall economic picture?
Well, it's mixed.
Yeah.
Our data analysis from data shows
Okay.
reveals some interesting things.
Right?
On one hand, the unemployment rate has been pretty low,
Okay.
but on the other hand, certain sectors, like construction and retail,
Right.
have actually seen job losses.
Huh. That's surprising.
Yeah, especially given Ford's focus on infrastructure projects.
Right. You'd think construction would be booming.
You would, but it's not quite playing out that way.
So what's going on there?
Well, there are a few factors at play.
Okay.
One is the whole electric vehicle situation.
Right. Ford's big on EVs.
He is. He's poured a lot of resources into that,
Okay.
trying to attract EV manufacturing to Ontario.
Sure.
But recent changes in U.S. policies have thrown a wrench in things.
I see. So it's kind of a gamble.
It is, and it's not clear how it's going to play out.
Yeah. Risky business.
Risky, yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of questionable decisions,
Uh-oh.
We can't ignore the Greenbelt controversy.
Oh, right.
That's been a big one for Ford.
Big source of criticism, from sure.
Right? I mean, in 2018, he made this big promise to protect the Greenbelt.
Yeah, that was a big campaign point.
It was a vital green space, right?
Absolutely.
But then he reversed course.
Open it up for development.
And it wasn't just any development.
No, it wasn't.
Those investigative pieces from the local and the Narwhal,
Oh, yeah, those were interesting.
they showed how certain developers with close ties to the governments were going to benefit big time from these Greenbelt changes.
I see.
So naturally, people started asking questions
Of course.
about transparency, about conflicts of interest.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Right. It really gets to the heart of this question. Who is this government working for?
That's the question, isn't it?
Are they working for everyday Ontarians?
Right.
Or are they more interested in helping out their buddies?
It's a tough one to answer definitively.
It is.
But it's a question we need to keep asking.
Absolutely.
As we dig deeper into these issues.
Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack here.
We do.
Healthcare, education, the economy.
All big challenges.
Big challenges.
And then there's this whole issue of who's benefiting from the government's decisions.
Yeah, who are they really working for?
A lot to think about.
A lot to think about, but it's important stuff.
It is.
So stay with us as we delve even deeper into all of this.
We're just getting started.
Okay, so we've spent the first part of this deep dive exploring some of those big challenges facing Ontario.
Yeah.
You know, the healthcare system under strain, the schools struggling to keep up, and that kind of murky economic picture we talked about.
A lot.
It is a lot, and I know it's a lot to absorb. But
Right.
the question I keep coming back to is,
Okay.
what does all of this actually mean
Yeah.
for the people living in Ontario?
Right. Beyond the headlines and the statistics,
Right.
these issues have real human consequences.
They do.
And I think one of the most worrying aspects,
Okay.
particularly with this healthcare crisis, is this erosion of public trust.
Oh, interesting.
When people can't access timely and reliable healthcare,
Yeah.
it creates this sense of vulnerability and anxiety.
Right. Like you just don't know what to do
Exactly.
when you need help.
Exactly.
And it's not just about individual experiences either,
No,
right?
it's not.
It impacts our sense of community and social responsibility.
Exactly, yeah.
If we can't rely on our healthcare system to take care of everyone,
Right.
what does that say about our values as a society?
Exactly. And this is where those personal stories in our source material
Right.
really hit home. Those blog posts from a Canadian returnee, the author really shares their struggles,
Yeah.
navigating the healthcare system
Right.
and just the emotional toll it takes on families.
Yeah, you can imagine.
The helplessness, the strain on relationships,
Wow.
even the financial burden,
Even with a publicly funded system, right?
even with a publicly funded system. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It really is.
It really is. And it's just a reminder that
Mm-hmm.
these aren't just these abstract policy debates.
Exactly.
These are real people's lives.
Absolutely.
And the consequences are huge.
They are. And you know what else the author points out?
What's that?
This vital role of community support,
Okay.
especially when the system is failing to meet people's needs.
So like when the formal support structures aren't there.
Exactly. People often turn to their personal networks, family, friends, church communities.
Right, to fill in the gaps.
Exactly. And it can be a blessing,
I bet.
but it can also be a burden,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
putting all that pressure on those personal relationships.
It's like it speaks to the resilience of people,
It does.
but also highlights the need for a stronger safety net.
Absolutely, like a more reliable support network at the systemic level.
It's complicated, isn't it?
Very complicated.
All right, so we've got healthcare under strain,
Right.
education underfunded, people feeling the pinch.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the mood like out there?
Well, this is where voter apathy becomes a concern.
Okay, so are people engaged? Are they planning to vote?
Well, that's the thing. A Canadian returnee brings up this historically low voter turnout,
Yeah.
especially among young people.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they make a really good point.
Okay.
They say this disengagement has serious consequences.
Like what?
Well, when a large portion of the population doesn't vote,
Yeah.
it allows a small, often more motivated group
Right.
to shape the future for everyone.
So the people who are most passionate about certain issues
Exactly.
are the ones whose voices get heard.
Exactly. And that can skew things in a certain direction.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
It's not always representative of the whole population.
Right, and I can understand when people feel like their vote doesn't matter,
Yeah,
especially when they're disillusioned with politics.
absolutely.
But like the author points out, staying silent also has consequences.
It does.
If you don't participate,
Right.
you're essentially letting others make decisions that impact your life.
Exactly. And that's why this upcoming election is so important.
It's a big one.
It is, and it's especially important for young people to get involved.
Why is that?
They have the most at stake,
Okay.
their future job prospects, access to affordable housing,
Okay.
the environment they'll inherit,
Makes sense.
but they're often the least likely to vote.
So how do we combat that?
How do we get people excited about politics?
Yeah. especially young people?
Well, a Canadian returnee offers some interesting suggestions.
Okay, what are they?
They talk about better civic education in schools,
Okay.
helping young people understand how the system works
Yeah.
and how they can participate.
Right, like the nuts and bolts of it all.
Exactly. And they also emphasize accessible information
Okay.
and the need to combat misinformation.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. It can be a huge barrier to engagement.
Right, because if you don't trust the information you're getting,
Exactly.
it's hard to feel motivated to participate.
Exactly. You feel like, why bother?
Yeah, it makes sense.
But it's not just about teaching people how to vote.
Right.
It's about making them want to vote.
Okay, how do we do that?
We need to inspire a sense of hope,
I like that.
a feeling that their voices can actually make a difference.
That their vote matters.
Exactly, that their vote matters.
Okay, so that's where individual agency comes in.
That's it.
Even though these problems might seem huge,
Mm-hmm.
people need to feel empowered to act.
Exactly. And that leads us back to the question we've been circling.
Which is,
Who is the government working for?
oh yeah, that's a big one.
It is, and it's a theme that keeps coming up in these sources.
It does.
Are the policies and priorities of the government really reflecting the needs and interests of the people?
Right. Or are they more aligned with, like, powerful groups?
Exactly, or special interests.
Like in the Greenbelt controversy.
The Greenbelt is a perfect example.
Right, because that investigation from the local and the narwhal
Right.
showed how a small group of developers were poised to gain a lot
A lot.
from opening up the Greenbelt.
Huge profits.
So it raises the question,
Yeah.
was this really about addressing the housing crisis,
Right.
like Ford said?
Like Ford claimed.
Or was it about benefiting those developers?
Yeah, who is this really helping?
And that theme of disconnect, right, between the government's actions and the needs of the people.
Yeah.
It comes up in other areas, too.
It does. Take online gambling, for instance.
Okay.
The government's been talking about the economic benefits.
Right, of iGaming Ontario.
Exactly.
Which is that platform they created
Right.
for online gambling.
Mm-hmm.
But are they considering the social costs?
Good question.
The impact on families and individuals
Yeah.
dealing with addiction?
That's a vital question.
Because it gets to the heart of how we measure progress and success.
Exactly. Is it just about economic indicators?
Right, like GDP and revenue?
Right.
Or do we also need to think about social well-being,
Absolutely.
environmental sustainability, equitable distribution of resources?
All of those things.
It's what to consider?
It is, and it highlights the need for a more
I don't know, a more
holistic
yeah.
and nuanced approach to policymaking.
I agree. One that looks at a long-term consequences
Exactly.
and the impact on all parts of society.
All segments of society. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, the consequences, the need for action,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively,
Right.
and this question of who the government's really serving.
Big picture stuff.
But I have to admit,
Okay.
it's starting to feel a bit overwhelming.
I understand.
Like, is there any room for optimism in all of this?
There's always room for optimism.
Okay, good.
Even when things seem really tough,
Yeah,
there's hope.
I like that.
And one of the most powerful sources of hope
Okay.
is the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit.
Oh, I love that.
Tell me more, right?
Yeah, tell me more.
Think about the stories we've been talking about.
Okay.
We see individuals and communities coming together,
Yep.
supporting each other, finding creative solutions, advocating for change.
Right, they're not just giving up.
Exactly. The Canadian returnee relying on their church community
Yeah,
during a health crisis, that's powerful.
it is.
And those parents organizing to demand better funding for schools.
Yeah,
That's another example.
people are fighting for what they believe in.
They are. They're not just sitting back and accepting these problems.
Right, they're trying to make things better.
And that's the power of collective action. When people come together, share their experiences, demand better,
Yeah,
it creates a force for change that's incredibly powerful.
it's inspiring to think about.
It is.
So even though things might seem bleak,
Mm-hmm.
there's still reason to believe they can improve.
Absolutely.
But it requires us to be informed,
Yes.
engaged, and active in shaping the future we want.
Well said, and that's a perfect transition into our final segment,
Right.
where we'll explore some concrete ways
Okay.
that individuals can get involved and make a difference.
I like it.
But first, let's take a moment to let these ideas sink in.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll be right back to dive into the power of civic engagement
Great.
and how you can be part of creating a better future for Ontario.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Ontario under Doug Ford.
Right.
And we've talked about healthcare, education, the Greenbelt,
Mm-hmm.
and that big question of who the government is really working for.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
And it can feel pretty heavy,
Yeah.
but I want to focus on solutions.
Okay, good.
What can people actually do to make a difference?
That's a great question.
Because it's easy to feel overwhelmed, right?
It is.
Like all these problems, what can one person do?
Well, one of the most fundamental things is voting.
Right, but how do we get people to actually vote?
Especially those who are feeling disillusioned or apathetic.
Right.
I think it's about more than just showing up at the polls.
Okay.
It's about informed participation.
What do you mean?
It's about understanding the issues,
Mm-hmm.
researching the candidates, their platforms, having those conversations about the future we want.
So it's a responsibility, not just a right.
Exactly. Voting is both.
And it doesn't stop there, right?
No, it doesn't.
It's about staying engaged beyond Election Day.
Absolutely.
Holding our elected officials accountable.
Exactly. Advocating for the policies we believe in.
Okay.
Participating in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Staying informed about the decisions that affect us.
So voting's key. But what about those who feel disconnected from politics?
Mm-hmm. There are other ways to contribute.
Okay, like what?
Volunteering.
Okay.
Supporting organizations.
Like what kind of organization?
Organizations that are helping healthcare workers,
Uh-huh.
pushing for education funding,
Mm-hmm.
joining community groups, working on the housing crisis.
Okay.
All those actions can make a difference.
So it's not always about these big, grand gestures.
No, not at all.
Even small things can help.
Absolutely.
What kind of small things?
Supporting local businesses,
Okay.
reducing our environmental impact,
Mhm.
checking in on our neighbors.
Right, just being a good neighbor.
Exactly. Those little things add up.
And they create a more connected community.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these choices to make.
Yeah.
And one of the big ones that keeps coming up
Mm-hmm.
is this debate over private versus public health care.
Right. It's a big one.
So what can individuals do to advocate for a system that works?
Well, I think education is key.
Okay.
Learn about the different models,
Mhm.
the potential impacts of privatization.
Okay.
Talk to your elected officials.
Right. Make your voice heard.
Exactly. Support organizations fighting for a strong public system.
That makes sense, but
Mm-hmm.
it can feel overwhelming, you know?
I get it.
Like, where do you even start?
Start with what you're most passionate about.
Okay.
What resonates with you the most.
So if you're really concerned about schools,
Yeah. Or the affordability crisis, the environment.
focus your energy there.
Exactly. Find your people. Get involved.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right.
Challenge the status quo.
Demand better from our leaders.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you want our listener to take away?
The future of Ontario isn't set in stone.
I like that.
It's being shaped right now by the choices we make,
Okay.
the actions we take, the conversations we have.
So we have the power to change things.
We do.
I'm feeling a little more optimistic now.
Good.
It's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at
There's
all.
still hope.
There's always hope.
This has been a really insightful conversation.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights
You're welcome.
and for reminding us that we all have a role to play.
It's true.
I hope our listeners are feeling energized
Me too.
and ready to take action.
Yeah, go out there and make a difference.
That's what it's all about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.